All right. Well, we missed you guys. And for 2 weeks, I've been working on an idea based on a documentary I watched. It made me think they need to hear this, because I know so many of you are going through really dark times, or have gone through dark times, or there could be dark times around the corner. And I wanted to relate this story and hope that it would be as encouraging to you as it was to me. First, I'm going to give you a little quiz. Never mind. Here's your quiz. Who am I? A flawed man. I have a way with words. I was hardly considered for leading a nation, and I defeat an invincible enemy when others have given up.
Donald Trump. Great answer.
You're so funny.
Donald Trump. Can you be more than one?
Oh, it is more than one, but I'm expecting you to say David. Okay.
Moses, Gideon.
Those are all great answers.
Okay. Here's another one. Who am I? I have a speech impediment. Under my leadership, a huge group of people trapped between the enemy and the sea are rescued and transported to the other side of the water. As a result of my leadership, an oppressed people become a nation and go on to fight for their land. Okay. Now, I've carefully crafted the wording here so that it applies to more than what you just said. Okay. In fact, both descriptions of David and Moses that I just gave right there are going to apply to one person, but we'll get to that later. Somebody you know, not personally, but you've heard of him. You've heard of him. Okay. Now, don't spend the whole time wondering who it is. All right. Now, what I was thinking, what am I trying to accomplish here? What do I hope that the walk away is? And it was that you would understand that restoration is not instant. His plan for restoration is a process. Yeah, I know we say that in a twinkling of an eye will be changed. And we think, when he comes back, boom, everything's going to be fine. I have this thinking suspicion it's not going to just instantly be fine, that there's still a process that's going to happen there. And then also the adversity, and this is the personal part, that adversity prepares the way for good things. Okay? And I'm going to explain a little more about those good things, because when we're thinking about that, we might not be thinking about it quite right. Now, I get up here, for those of you who've been here a while, sometimes I go into math stuff, and sometimes I go into science stuff. Tonight, we're going to go into history. Okay. I think, first of all, and I've given you this before, that there's these extreme perspectives. There's looking at things really close up through a microscope, and there's looking at things from very far away, where we get our wide angle, and this lays up in the space station looking at a piece of the Earth. I think that our human tendency, when we experience pain and tragedy, is we get really focused in. Okay, all that stuff disappears. You hit your thumb with a hammer, and it just, and you're just right here for a second. None of that. Even close your eyes. We're right here, right now. Pain, right here. And I think that the solution when we experience this pain is to try and zoom out a little bit and see the bigger picture. So, I'm going to suggest tonight that our lifespan is not even a wide enough view. And that's why I love history, because you get more than just your lifespan. You get hundreds or thousands of years to really zoom out and look at stuff. So tonight, we're not going to zoom out like she is and look at a huge area. We're going to zoom out in time and look at one little specific spot on the planet over hundreds, thousands of years. And I want us to remember this. Keep this in mind. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Here's our spot. Dover. Okay, this is Europe. This is where John comes from, right? This area. Okay, here's England. You with me? Kind of know your geography a little bit? Okay, we're going to look at Dover, and that is where the shortest distance between the English Isles and the European mainland is. And this right here, across here, is about 21 miles or so. You know when they swim the English Channel? They swim across right there. It takes them about 10 hours or so of swimming, I think, which to me is, wow. Okay, so that's the spot we're going to be looking at. This is what it looks like when you're coming in from the sea. It's the White Cliffs of Dover. You might have heard songs about that or seen those in movies. These are limestone cliffs. They go, over 300 feet high, and limestone's kind of like chalk, so it's easy to dig into. That's going to be a key little thing that will come up later. Now, on top of those cliffs, there's a castle. But for a moment, I want you to picture this without the castle. See all these mounds of earth around here? Some of those have been put there, in the last couple thousand years through the Middle Ages as they expanded the castle. But there's some indications that these mounds, that the initial mounds were started back in the Iron Age. They've done excavations that as far back as then, people were fortifying this location. Okay, about 2,000 years ago, the Romans invaded England, and they did it across that little 20-mile stretch. Okay, see the White Cliffs of Dover in the background there of that photograph of the Romans coming in? Okay. So they built a fort there, and they built a lighthouse that's still standing. This is the oldest building in England. And I'm sure that the people that were being invaded at the time, during their lifetimes, thought to themselves, this is not good. Okay. Fast forward about 1,000 years. Okay, this is your history story. Okay, you with me? Okay. Fast forward about 1,000 years, we have a guy named William the Conqueror. He also invades England across that short little stretch of sea. He comes in. Okay, he knocks down that Roman fort, uses the rubble as the foundation for his own fort, which is Dover Castle. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever seen the Bayeux Tapestry. It extends for a long way. Either way, it's like a cartoon medieval version of the events of William the Conqueror coming over and conquering England. Okay, and I'm sure that these poor guys here, being conquered at the time during their lifespans, thought, this is not good. Okay. Let's fast forward just a little this time to William the Conqueror's either great-grandson or great-great-grandson. I forgot how many generations were in there. Okay, his name is Henry II, and he is King of England. He has a falling out with his longtime friend, Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay? They just can't come to a reconciliation. He sends 4 knights to Canterbury Cathedral, where Thomas Becket is, to arrest him. Thomas Becket refuses to go with the knights, and they cut him down right there in front of the altar in Canterbury Cathedral, kill him. And I'm sure that Thomas Becket was thinking at the time, this is not good, right? Okay, tragedy everywhere. Now, the people were thinking this is not good too, because he just killed the guy in the church, in the cathedral. People are upset with Henry II. Not only that, but France is ready to come against him. Scotland's ready to come against him. Flanders is coming against him. His wife and his sons are coming against him. And so he goes to Canterbury Cathedral and he does penance for the death of Thomas Becket. He takes off his royal robes. He dons sackcloth. He allows all the monks there to whip him a certain number of times. I forget how many. And the very next day, one of those foreign countries coming against him is defeated. And so it furthers this myth of that there's something miraculous about Thomas Becket. He's a saint, and he's sainted by this point. They've even built a shrine in Canterbury Cathedral. Okay, that's not our spot is Dover Castle. He was killed in Canterbury Cathedral. Okay, keep that straight. So this is happening at Canterbury Cathedral. Henry II lowers himself, gets beaten. Even the King of France hears about this. And the King of France has a sick son. And he comes across, this is England's first royal visit. He hears about the miracles occurring at this spot where Thomas Becket was killed. He comes across, says, I have to go there and pray for my son. So he comes across at Dover, that little piece, okay? From Dover, he goes to Canterbury Cathedral, says his prayers, goes back to Dover Castle, stays the night there with Henry II, and then goes home. Now, I'm sure Dover Castle was not quite as impressive as Henry II would have liked. I mean, he just had a royal visit, and it was at this place, okay? So either out of guilt regarding the death of Thomas Becket, or out of vanity because royalty just came over and saw this little dump, he dumps a bunch of money into Dover Castle. Not Canterbury Cathedral, where the guy was killed, but Dover Castle. And he spends more on this location for the rest of his reign than on any other castle. And so in the end, this place is starting to look pretty impressive. Now, whether it was one motive or the other, I'm guessing it probably took both to get him to do that, because Henry II was a pretty stubborn guy, from what I could tell.
Pretty what?
Stubborn. Yeah. He even, in Dover Castle, builds a shrine to Thomas Becket. If you go there on tour, you will see this room dedicated to Thomas Becket, because his entire reign now is based upon this miracle man that was killed because of him, but he's done penance, and so he's riding those coattails for as long as he can. We're going to fast forward again. Is everybody good on that story up till now? Okay. We're going to fast forward to the 13th century. Okay. Again, France comes over, lays siege to Dover Castle. This time, they understand that we can dig into this limestone. It's really easy to dig. So they dig under and they collapse one of the curtain walls of the castle. And, you know, these guys inside are thinking, this is not good. And we wish this limestone wasn't so easy to tunnel into, right? Okay? If only these cliffs were made of granite. Well, since they are easy to tunnel into, and none of the sieges, neither one are successful. Okay, the French go home. They think, okay, let's build tunnels in advance so that if this happens again and somebody comes over and tries to tunnel under our castle, we'll have tunnels of our own to try and keep them out. Okay, so now they've built themselves some defensive tunnels under there. We're going to fast forward again. A few hundred years, now Napoleon is on the verge of coming over in the same spot. He's going to invade England. And they're freaking out. They're moving their troops to Dover Castle. Okay, and they figure out we can't fit as many troops as we need in this fort, in this Dover Castle. So they dig out more tunnels underneath, and they dig out barracks, and they stick all their extra soldiers under the castle. Okay? Now, Napoleon doesn't actually make it across. Some stuff happens, he doesn't end up doing that. And I'm sure people were thinking, after all that effort and digging all that stuff out and making those barracks, what a waste of time. He didn't even show up. But before we fast forward again, I want you to consider the possibility that this location, Dover Castle, has been prepared over hundreds, possibly thousands of years for something truly special. Maybe as far back as the flood, when these limestone cliffs emerged from the water that were easy to carve into. Over the course of history, with the threat of invaders, the tragedy, guilt, the vanity, all shaping this fortress here at Dover, Now we fast forward to 1940, World War II. Okay? The Nazis are winning at this point. There's Dover. Here's our little strip of water. Okay? The Nazis have taken France. They've pushed the English armed forces, the British armed forces in Western Europe towards the sea. They're about to pinch them in and destroy them. They've destroyed the ports. The British Army needs to get out of here before they're completely wiped out. Underneath Dover Castle, those barracks and those tunnels that were dug out during Napoleonic times are now converted, well, since World War I, they are converted into a war headquarters. And from this war headquarters, this is an actual picture, they covered up the table and the board to pass it by the intelligence officers or whatever. Britain is making plans for evacuating as much of their army as they can possibly get. And it doesn't look good. They're expecting they are going to be wiped out. They're hoping to rescue, I think I saw one figure that said maybe 60,000 troops off the mainland. The whole project is called Operation Dynamo. And this guy, Bertram Ramsay, is in control of it. This is going to be the largest evacuation in military history. We're taking them, thank you, from the beaches of Dunkirk across that little narrow strip of water to Dover. We've got to get them back. Now, on day one, and keep in mind, the ports have been destroyed. You can't get the big ships in here. The British are bringing all these little fishing boats. They're doing everything they can to try and get these soldiers off the beach and into ships so they can get back to Dover. The first day, they rescue 7,669 souls. The weather stays unusually calm for the next week, a little more. And by the 8th day, they have rescued 338,226 people. Some British, some French. 4/5 of the British Army in Western Europe are rescued. And that's a wonderful thing. But now we have entered this period that Winston Churchill refers to as the darkest hour, because the situation is this. England has evacuated. They're no longer there. Germany has the whole thing. And the Allies are losing this fight. Germany's unstoppable. The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, is blitzing London with bombs. It's called the Blitz. They're coming over, they're bombing London. And for years, the British hold out by themselves, alone. Let's go back to Dover Castle. Now, it's a few years later, the Americans have joined the fight. They're planning an invasion. The Allies are planning an invasion of Europe. So now, instead of invading towards England, now we're planning the invasion back to push back the Nazis. The most likely spot to launch this invasion is Dover, shortest distance, right? Okay. But this time, Dover is going to be used as a decoy. Okay, from the tunnels and barracks that were dug underneath, they're sending out messages that are being intercepted by the Nazis. They're false messages saying that this is where everyone's going to gather to launch this invasion. They're even setting up these blow-up tanks, trucks, ships to make it look like they're assembling troops at Dover. But that is not, this is a real tank. This is the inflatable, by the way. Can you tell? Kind of, but not from the air. Look at that bubbly. It looks like something you'd find in the pool. Okay. That's not where the invasion launches. It launches not from Dover, but from here to the beaches at Normandy, the event that we refer to as D-Day, okay, or Operation Overlord. Okay, we have the invasion of Normandy. Okay, troops pour in, push Hitler back, turning point in the war. So, back to Dover. There's the cliffs, there's the castle. Over hundreds, even thousands of years, this location has been prepared by adversity. Okay, we had the invasions, not good. More invasions, death, defeat, not good. We had tragedy and that king, motivated by guilt or vanity or whatever, not good. Okay? And in the lifetimes of all these people that were there during these tragic times, how could they know that eventually this location, how could they know in their lifetimes? Okay, we have this kind of view, don't we? All right. Our time here is so short and our perspective is so limited. Sometimes we don't get to see the good that comes out of the trials. We're not here long enough. Bertram Ramsey, that guy I showed you that was in charge of the evacuation of all the troops, he died in a plane crash before the war was over. He didn't get to see it. Okay? Dover Castle was a place prepared for a great work, prepared for a great deliverance, instrumental in defeating a horrible enemy. Okay? And when Winston Churchill looked back on this, while it was truly a dark hour for Britain, he did not title his book about this war Darkest Hour. That was the movie. He titled his book Their Finest Hour. And I think that, and I would hope that we would all conduct ourselves so well under adversity that when we look back in the rearview mirror, we can have the same perspective. Or as Winston said it, and I've edited this to personalize it, taking the British Commonwealth out, let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties and so bear ourselves that men will say, this was our finest hour. So, consider it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Or as Winston would say, never, 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 never give up. Because all his cabinet wanted to surrender to Germany. And he said, no, I will not surrender to that man. So, when we go back to who am I? And now I've combined all those things that I said before. Those descriptions that fit King David and Moses. Who do you think I'm talking about?
Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill, of course. That last one, as a result of World War II, a nation became a nation in a day. And they've been fighting for the land ever since. But restoration is a process, okay? Still in that process. God did not hit pause on his plan when Yeshua ascended. He has been working on it. And does it surprise you that a man with similarities to David and Moses would be instrumental in setting this up so that a nation could become a nation in a day? So, remember, adversity prepares the way for good things, and restoration's not instant. It's a process. You've heard, all things work together for good. But it didn't say you're good. And it never promised you'd see the good in your lifetime. Abraham was made a promise, and he died before that promise was fulfilled. That promise, they're still working on it. But he had faith. And faith is when you believe something that's beyond what you can see with your mortal eyes and comprehend with your mortal mind.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela. That's it's such a neat story, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm delighted by that story. It just warmed the cockles of my heart. When I was, we watched that documentary, both of us were pretty much crying the whole time. It was a very touching story. That was not the focus of their story. It was just a documentary about Dover Castle. And yet we both were like, something is going on here. That's a different situation, and it was quite fascinating. But we thought that it would be a useful message for all of us, because we're struggling, a lot of us, and we don't know what for. And we may never remember Dover Castle. And the Alamo. Anyway, thank you for sharing that, Angela. I appreciate that very much. And now I think that we'll be able to actually finish up Acts chapter 15 today. If you will, please join me in Acts chapter 15. We are going to look at just a key passage. The thing is, with Acts chapter 15, we have gotten into this pretty deep. The only thing that we haven't really covered, which I think is kind of funny because it's actually the key in the whole linchpin of chapter 15, is the letter to the Gentiles, regarding what are they supposed to do, what are the requirements for Gentiles. And so we've read that section a couple of times, but we haven't really dug that deep into it to figure out what is this and what does it mean for these Gentiles. So that's what we're looking at today, and I'm pretty sure that we can move through this, and then hopefully next time we'll be on to Acts chapter 15. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first just read verses 19 through 21, which basically is the text of the letter to the Gentiles. Okay, so follow along with me as I just read the text of the letter to the Gentiles. He says, therefore, and always remember when you see the word in the Bible, therefore, what's it there for? Therefore, my judgment is that we should not cause trouble to the Goyim, the Gentiles, the nations who are turning to God. Instead, we should write them a letter telling them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from fornication, or sexual immorality, yours might say, from what is strangled, and from blood. For, or because, from the earliest times, Moshe has had in every city those who proclaim him, with his words being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. That is the text of the letter to the Gentiles. That's the paragraph. That was obviously a very short letter. Not a lot of detail. And I think that's key, very key to our trying to understand, what does this mean? Does that seem light on detail to you? It's very light on details. In fact, as we'll see as we look through this a little bit deeper, the Gentiles might read this and say, well, that don't make no sense at all. Some of these things would be literally foreign to them to the point of we don't even know what you're talking about. So just keep that in mind as we move forward a little bit. This is some rather obscure instruction. In fact, the general Christian scholarship today has really got a lot of confusion about what this means. I've told you before about the Blue Letter Bible or Bible study notes, all these different online things. There's one that I really enjoy, and I've sent it to you before. I'll try to send it to you again, where you can find, like, everybody who's ever written a commentary on the book of Acts chapter 15 is there, just in order. All the Christian scholars going all the way back to the church fathers. Just after Yeshua died, the first people who were commenting on this, it's in there. And they're all over the map. We got really no idea what to do with this, which it should not be surprising to you based on what we've discovered before in our study so far, which we'll touch on. But I want to talk with you first about just a quick review, because the last time we were together, which was 2 weeks ago, we talked about the first of these things, which was things that were polluted by idols. Note that there's not a mention of food There's no mention of food in there. And yet some of your translations may say to abstain from meats or foods that have been sacrificed to an idol, which is very common understanding, is they're somehow attaching this to food. Let me ask you this. Do you look at this and does your mind automatically go to food? Just because your text does? What do you think about this when you say, hey, stay away from things polluted by idols? What does it mean to be polluted by idols? Or what are these things that can be polluted by idols?
Anything that steals your focus from God.
Okay, that would be a broader definition of idolatry. So steer clear of idolatry. That would be definitely, but it doesn't say that. I mean, you can definitely imply that. Steer clear of idolatry. But this says steer clear of things polluted by idols, which is a strange way of saying it. You might think it would just be a lot clearer to say, don't be involved in idolatry. Because the pagans were very clearly involved in idolatry. And we got idols for this, and little totems we can wear around our necks, and bigger ones for our houses, and giant ones on the side of the road, and temples. Most of the meat that you can buy in the marketplace has probably already been sacrificed to an idol and then repackaged and sold if it wasn't used in the temple service for that strange god. So things polluted by idols, I think we want to keep in mind is remember that many, many things were offered to idols. Not just meats, but fruits and vegetables, family pet, money offerings, children even. Yes, I mean, there would be many, many things that would be sacrificed to an idol. And when we have to abstain from things that have been sacrificed to an idol, most people have interpreted this to be foods. But then I mentioned last time we were together, look at that passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, where Paul seems to be saying, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. We all know that there's no such thing as an idol in the world, but he seemingly seems to be giving this piece of advice. If you're going to eat meat sacrificed to an idol, just don't let anybody see you do it, because you don't want to offend them. Jan?
Just real quick, because I'm always going to the practical side.
Yeah.
Application side of it. Don't a lot of people, not just, this is one side of it, sacrifice to idols. Why do people get themselves in that trouble? Why do they do that? And to a large degree, doesn't it have to do with being addicted to something?
Addictions, yeah, absolutely.
So the addiction
is
the idol, but then it causes all of these sacrifices. What? Your family, your home,
your health, your money, yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great example. I think an addiction of any kind can definitely become an idol in your life, and you can sacrifice a great many things to that idol. Absolutely, very good insight, Derek.
I just thought, I wonder if things polluted by idols could also be including things like Ouija boards and just different
occult type stuff. Yeah,
pentagrams and things that are just weird. And
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see both Jews and Christians who are involved in, I'm going to check out my horoscope, or I'm going to go to see a medium, or to try and get a reading or something because they want to know the future. That's not as uncommon as you might think. Steve.
What do you think about Facebook, where they say your name means this, or next year you're going to have this?
Sure. That could. Yeah, it's a bit of. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's not uncommon, and I totally understand what you're saying, and I agree. There can be so many things that in this culture that we just kind of. I think we've just been so unattached to God's definition of what idolatry is, that we have tended to, as Christians who are just so far removed from the context of the Bible and the times in which it was written, that we tend to think Well, in the Bible, you got all these little statues, you know. We don't do that anymore, you know. We've moved beyond that, the age of reason and enlightenment, you know. We don't do the little idols anymore. Everybody knows that that's fake. That's true to a large extent. And yet, in some religions, they do still have little idols, like Buddha or, you know, Krishna, you know.
A Chinese restaurant without.
Yeah, that's true. Little Buddha statues or something. But you know, we go, oh, that's cute, you know, it's nothing, it's no big deal. It's a big deal to the people who put it there. We think of it as nothing. But what we fail to think about as idolatry is what Jan was talking about, which is anything in our lives that takes away from the place of God. The biggest thing that I have always tried to remember in my own life, and believe me, it has happened many times, that I have been found in idolatry, unwittingly, thank God. But here's what it is. When I'm concerned, and that's putting it mildly, when I'm concerned about something, whether it's money, my health, can your health be an idol? You bet it can. Can your money be an idol? Absolutely it can. What else can be an idol?
That's the usual form of it.
Yeah, money.
Cars,
Your
house,
yeah,
children,
your children
wife.
can be an idol. Yes,
Influence, you know.
influence and power. Yes, absolutely. There are so many things, and anything that you're concerned about, and again, I'm using that term lightly. You might be freaking out about it. Anything that you are concerned or freaking out about might be in the place of an idol in your life. And here's the important thing. God is wholeheartedly dedicated to ridding your life of idolatry. And He will remove it from you. And the harder that you hold on to it, the more painful it's going to be when He rips it out of your hands. Angela?
Did anyone say health?
Yes, I did. Yeah, absolutely. Health is one of the big ones. Health and money are the ones that strike at all of us. And it is so challenging to say, I'm not going to freak out. Now listen, please do not at all in any circumstance hear me saying that you shouldn't be concerned about your health. I mean, it's a human natural reaction that when you go to the doctor and he says, hey, I want you to come back, you know, we're going to run some more tests on this. Of course you're going to freak out. You would not be human if you didn't. Or you go to work one day and your boss says, yeah, we're having layoffs. Of course you're going to freak out. And it's okay to freak out. For a while. How long are you going to freak out? To what extent? That's where the rub lies. Is how long? And what are you going to do? And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the big one. What do you do in response? What are you willing to do in response to that crisis? Yes, it's okay to freak out. That's human nature. You are a human. You will freak out. Let that play out. Yes, you're going to have a few sleepless nights. You might have a few sleepless weeks. Let's not let it turn into a few sleepless years. Let's not freak out to the point where I'm willing to maybe bend my ethics, my morals, what I'm comfortable with, damaging relationships, freaking out my family, damaging my relationship with my wife or my husband or other people around me as I seek for a way out of this situation. That's where we get into trouble, is our reaction to the crises that hit us. It's okay to freak out. Just what are you going to do with that freak out?
So any form of perfectionism, which all these things that you said, it's about what do we do to
Yeah.
feel okay about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Mostly, for the most part.
Right.
And so that's fine, make your list, right? And then
Yeah.
over here on this list, or you could do it either way.
Mm-hmm.
My husband said he's the right hand for the Lord.
There you
For
go.
some reason I like this.
That's a good insight.
But, so we have his will, his agenda, and the way he sees it,
Right.
that we want this more
Right.
than we want this.
Right.
And so that's where we That's where we wrestle.
Yep.
That's the world we wrestle in.
Yep,
We've
absolutely.
got our list here,
Mhm.
and we've got this.
Yeah.
And all of us is fine, just want this more.
Right.
And how that sounds
And I don't,
simple.
it does sound simple, and everything that is simple is not always easy. But I would say this, if you say, and it's okay to have your desires. I mean, my desire is that Jerry would have his leg healed. My desire is that the James family would get a good job that would provide them with the resources that they need. My desire is that this person would not die or that person would get better. It's okay to have my own desires. And it's okay to let the Lord know what your desires are. But at the end of the day, you have to be willing to say, like Yeshua did, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. That's the issue. We have to be willing to back off. God knows that we have our own desires. God knows that we have our own desires and we want what we want. That's not unusual. What is unusual in people of faith, and it shouldn't be, and we need to build it up even stronger, is to say, nevertheless, not my will, but yours. This is what I want, but you may be working on something that is beyond the scope of what I can see. And that's exactly what Angela was talking about. It may be in your lifetime, it may not. Something that's working out in your life may be for your grandchildren. I don't know. But here's the issue. You're blind. And you have to recognize that you're blind. And you have to be humble and say, I don't know what you're doing, but I know it must be good because I trust you and you're awesome. Give me the faith, just like a mustard seed, to know that and keep that planted in my mind. Something good is coming of this. I just don't know what it is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, if you can't do without it, other than Yeshua and Elohim, if you can't do it without it, you got a problem.
Sure. Yeah.
And coffee's a big one.
Yeah, sure.
Coffee's a huge one.
Sure.
So you try to do the addiction, so you do it every other day. Because if you're doing it where you can't do it without it, that's idolatry. That's a form of it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So this is the instructions to the Gentiles, is that you're going to need to start ridding yourselves of these dependencies that you have in your life. Okay? So there's number one, and that's a little bit in review because we touched on that a couple of weeks ago, just momentarily. So that was just a brief review on the idolatry thing. Now, remember that we are talking about the key issues here that seem to be coming up is the party of the Pharisees who had become believers. Remember that these are not fake believers. These are not Judaizers, as Paul will undoubtedly call them later. These are people who are very concerned that these Gentiles need to convert to Judaism, full-on conversion, and that they must do all of the instructions of halakha. They're not saying they must follow the first 5 books of the Bible. They're saying they must follow all the rules. Now, that's not realistic. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind here because that's what we're really dealing with. Second thing, we just reviewed polluted by idols. Now, I want to bring something to your attention for just a moment. I want you to think about this. There have only been 2 mediators in human history with absolute authority to relay and explain or explicate God's Torah, God's instructions for what is right and what is wrong, His instructions for holiness, righteousness, purity. There are only 2 people in the history of this planet that have had that authority. Who are they? Moses and Jesus, period. Those are the only guys who received a message directly from the Father. Not so with my servant Moses. He and I speak face to face. Yeshua, I only speak what I heard from my Father. Do we have any conception in our mind that Yeshua was closer to God than Moses was? Yeah, clearly. Jesus' relationship with the Father was even greater than Moses. And Moses heard from his, I'm just talking to my buddy here. Okay? These 2 guys are the only guys in human history who received a direct message from God that says, here's the message, here's the instructions, relay it to my people. Right? Only those 2 guys. Yes, sir?
How was it different with Isaiah and the other prophets?
That's a great question. If you are familiar at all with your prophets, and there have been, that word mediator is in your Torah and in the Tanakh regarding other prophets. Other prophets have been kind of like mediators, but they have not. Yeah, they have not had the same authority. And almost every single instance, aside from those two guys, what they're doing is correcting the people because they're not following. And when they are saying, "Thus saith the Lord," they're saying, if you don't follow the instructions that God gave you, this is what's going to happen. And here is the sign that you will know that I am speaking the truth. This is going to happen to you, and they would predict the future. Thus saith the Lord. These guys that are not Moses and Jesus, their whole purpose is to draw those people back to the words of Moses and correct them and talk to them about what does the commandments of Moses mean. They're teachers. They're interpreters. They don't have the authority to give new instructions, and they don't have the authority to change the instructions ever. Period. Right? Now, think about this. There was no prophet before Moses or until Yeshua came who can change or amend or do away with or do anything to that Torah except explain it, uphold it, teach it, and command it. Right? Then Yeshua comes along. There is no prophet after him or until he returns who can change, amend, do anything to that Torah. Right? Here's the problem with that. Has it happened?
Yeah. Constantine.
That's why we're all here. Something happened. What happened? We had a huge misunderstanding. Something went terribly wrong. Question for you, could Yeshua change the Torah? Does he have the authority to change, add to, take away from, or otherwise amend the Torah? Does he have that authority? Yes, he does. But here's the problem. According to what God had told us before, if someone comes, Deuteronomy 17 and 18 explicitly explains from God, if someone comes along and tries to change these instructions, what do you know about that person? It's a false prophet. So could Yeshua technically have made changes to the law? I suppose he could. Since he is the Word made flesh, he is God. Does God ever change? Scripture says absolutely not. So if he had made changes to the law, then he would have been deemed a false prophet and no one would have believed he was the Messiah. Does he have that authority? Theoretically, yes. But it would be like God changing his mind. That would be like God changing his whole plan for humanity. It would be like God being a human, changing his interpretation, changing the way he's going to interact with man. Yes, he could have, but he wouldn't have. It would be impossible for God to contradict himself. And yet, it happened. Why did it happen? Well, we got some new prophets that came along on the scene, don't we? We got the Pope. The Pope came along and said, I have the authority that I got from Peter, that Peter got from Yeshua, that Yeshua got from the Father, that gives me the authority to change the Bible. Does the Pope have that authority? Why does he think he does?
Because of the obscure passage.
What obscure passage?
One where you even loose in heaven, you loose on earth.
That's a great observation. What does it mean to bind and loose? And if you're from the charismatic persuasion, you might think this has to do with casting out demons. I'm here to tell you that it is not. Angela?
Allow and forbid.
That is correct. The disciples were given the authority to make decisions on halakha, which is interesting because that's exactly what they're doing in Acts chapter 15. They are exercising the authority to bind and loose right here. They have the right to judge and make decisions on matters of controversy. That's what binding and loosing is. Did God give Peter the right to change everything that he could then pass down to the Pope? And the Pope can make new instructions for the people of God? Absolutely not. Darren?
Well, that's where the confusion is. They can only bind or loose what is allowed in heaven. So therefore, what the Scripture says, you do.
Good insight. Good insight. Yeah, you can't contradict God in your binding and loosing. You got to have the Spirit of God You got to be led by the Spirit of God to interpret the will of God, to interpret those passages and scriptures in the Bible to make good decisions and judgments that comport with what the Spirit would want. You must align yourself with His will and not your own. Same thing. His will and not yours. We got the prophet Mohammad who comes along with a new revelation. We got a problem with that, don't we? We got the prophet Joseph Smith of Mormonism who comes along with a new revelation. Yeah. Now here's the problem. Where did all this start? Started with Paul. Now, am I saying that Paul tried to change the Torah or the commandments of God? Some people think he did.
It's hard to understand.
It's hard to understand. And we're here to try to clear that up. But here's that's the problem, is that these people have arrogated authority to themselves. They have taken this authority upon themselves. The Pope, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Paul, no. Paul did not take on authority to himself to say, I'm going to change the words of God, or we know that Paul would be a false apostle, a false messenger of some kind. Just something to keep in mind. You can't change the law of God. It's not possible. Yeshua's certainly not going to do it. That's how we know that these guys are false prophets. But if Paul did change, or if Paul gave a correct interpretation, as some people misunderstand him to be saying that the Torah is gone, Jesus nailed the Torah to the cross, then you've got no reason at all to suppose that Joseph Smith didn't also get a new revelation from God, right? If God is able to change his mind, or if Jesus came and changed the instructions, or if Paul came along and changed the instructions, then what's the problem with Joseph Smith changing the instructions? There is no problem. What's the problem with Muhammad coming along with a new message? There is no problem. What's the problem with the Pope changing the message? Not a problem. It changes. It is what it is. It changes over time. It changes with culture. It changes based upon your perspective. Do you see the problem with that?
It's a living document, apparently.
It's a living document. Those of you who are constitutional scholars will understand that reference. It's the exact same thing that you have happening in America. And I've used that correlation before in this setting.
Paul made it a point to say, if anybody brings a different gospel than the one I've delivered to you, let him be cursed.
That's right. That's right.
So it behooves anybody to examine that gospel.
We must be Berean and say, that's fascinating. Let me recheck that out. Let me look into my Bible and see if what you're saying is so. That's what we have to do. So there you go. We can't have arrogated authority, these people taking authority to themselves to try to change things. Otherwise, any one of these people could be right.
So how about people like Calvin and Wesley?
John Wesley?
Yes. So they're spreading the gospel, but putting their own precepts on it with their own congregational theories and rules. False prophets?
That is a really, really challenging question, and I am not willing to kick the last 2,000 years under the bus and say, does that mean that we've been operating under a false premise for 2,000 years almost? Yeah. Is God able to save people out of their ignorance? Yeah. Are we able to somehow overcome this challenge of the truth being distorted and twisted? Yes. The Holy Spirit of God can and will guide people on the path of truth in spite of the fact that they might have some doctrine in their mind that says, yeah, I don't have to do that. I'm not responsible for that. These instructions that God gave to the Jews, that's for the Jews. Yes, you can do that, and you can live a fairly righteous life. Will you potentially cross some boundaries that you shouldn't? Yes. Have we all done that throughout all human history? And is God still able to save people? Absolutely. Have there been errors throughout all time? Absolutely. It's really no different. John?
What about when Yeshua opened up the curtain, ripped open the curtain, and now in this chapter also, the Gentiles are accepted. I still feel we have two groups. We have the true core Jews that are born Jew, and we have the Gentiles. But the Gentiles follow the gospel.
Yeah. Oh, the Gentiles.
I know for what you're saying, I absolutely agree with. We don't do away with anything. But the set of rules is different for the Gentiles. And we, as a group, are Gentiles. We're not Jews.
Yes.
Some of us.
No, that's a good question and a good thought process. Let me just point out two things regarding what you said. The rending of the curtain inside the temple when Yeshua died, what does that signify? I mean, what is that divider there for?
God is open to all of us.
Yes.
Exclusivity is gone.
Yes, access to the throne of grace, as Paul would say, is thrown wide open to the world. Absolutely agree at 100%. Now, is there two people? There's not supposed to be. Is there two sets of rules? Not according to God.
I feel there is.
You feel there is. You were entitled to that. You were entitled to think so. But no, I disagree with you, and that's totally cool. We love each other and we can disagree. That's all good. But I would go by just the unity of the scriptures where God says when Gentiles joined Israel prior to Jesus. Because Moses asked that same question. Is there a separate set of rules for these people who have joined us? And God said, no. There is one Torah for anyone who wants to join this family. And I would say, unless you can find something in any of the writings of the New Testament that suggest otherwise, I would say it's not possible. And if you do find something that seemingly could be interpreted that way, I would say you may need to rethink that. But that's, of course, my interpretation. Carla.
I think in our Western thought, I know throughout my time in churches, I've heard of us referred to as Gentiles.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any that I know of Jewish blood in
Sure.
my ethnic background.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Word, it says when the Gentiles, those that aren't in the Jewish family, come into the faith, they are no longer Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
They are not that anymore. It says, for you were once Gentiles, but you're no longer Gentiles. So
Yeah.
it's coming into one faith and one law for all who believe in God.
Yeah, and that's a good insight, because you can see Peter, for example, says right at the beginning of the book of 1 Peter, he says, to these people out there who are from Asia and Bithynia and Galatia and Cappadocia, who once were not, but who have now been brought close, who before you were not my people, but now you are my people. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So, and Paul will tell us in Romans that these Gentiles are grafted in to the tree that is Israel. So, in a very real sense, I would say, and this so clearly comports with what's happening here in Acts chapter 15. It's like, do these people who are joining the congregation of the Lord need to become Jews? No. Do they need to become adopted as sons and daughters? Yes. That very much so. There is a spiritual principle here that is at play, and not a principle, because I think that's the problem that we have from the circumcision party that is saying they must join us in all the ways that we deem to be what it means to be a member of the family of God, which was unfortunately in some cases based upon physicality, things that you could see and touch and taste and identify with your flesh, which things like tzitzit, and I want to wear a little hat, and I'm going to go to the synagogue on Sabbath day, and I'm going to observe this commandment and that commandment, which is in a physical sense, that we were interpreting it that way here. And Peter and James and John, and I think that this is what this whole thing is about, part of it at least, is no, we don't want to convert them to the way we do things. God is showing us through the power of His Spirit that they are joining us on a deeper level. They don't need to look like us. They'll do the things that we do, but not in the way that we're doing them. They, in a much more spiritual sense, they will become members of the household of God. They're not going to convert to Judaism, and they may not look exactly like us because, frankly, we know, because Yeshua taught us, some of these people were doing things just wrong. And some of their religious observances have become almost entirely external. So they're saying, we need to convert these people to what we do externally. And God's saying, no, I'm converting them to internals. Forget about your external stuff. Tammy.
The way I understood it is the Jews are grafted into Christ, and so are the Gentiles. So we're not necessarily, we are grafted into Christ because he came and he is what it says free. So that's just the way I interpret it.
Yeah, no, and I don't think there's
necessarily grafted in to the Jews, or the Jews are grafted in.
Yeah, and I would say I would only use different terms, but in a different context. But yes, essentially you're right. But what I would say is we can't use the term Jews necessarily because that's not what it is. The family of God has always been called Israel. Okay, the Jews are a part of that. Gentiles are a part of that. There are 11 other tribes that are part of that. But the family of God is called Israel. And Paul used, and I would just say words mean things, and Paul uses words for a specific reason. And when he says they have been grafted into Israel, it doesn't say that they've been grafted into Christ. It says that they have been grafted into the tree that is Israel through the Messiah. So I would say, yes, the family of God is called Israel. It is comprised of all different ethnic groups and peoples throughout time and history and place, irregardless.
Yeah, it doesn't say grafted into Judaism.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say grafted into Judaism, and I think that's the really big issue in this chapter, is they need to be grafted into the way we do things. And it shouldn't surprise us, because if we're talking to somebody and we're sharing the gospel, what do we want them to do? Well, we want them to do things the way we do things. But what if they converted to Presbyterianism instead of our brand of Christianity, which is Southern Baptist? Do we have a problem with that? Yeah, we do, because we don't like that. We've got our way of seeing things and our way of doing things, and we would rather that they convert to becoming Southern Baptists and not Calvinists or not Presbyterians or not Seventh-day Adventists, because we like our own brand of doing things. And that's exactly what was happening here, because not like today where we have thousands of branches of Christianity. How many branches of God worship do we have in this day? Well, 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5. I mean, you only need one hand. It's much more monolithic than it is now. I mean, it's all over the place now. So if you convert to any one of these branches that are alive in this day, yeah, there's some big differences between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. But on the Pharisee side, you got Essenes and Pharisees and the proselytes and stuff. They're on this side. The Pharisees are kind of in a group by themselves, and there's a reason they don't exist anymore. You can't convert anybody to Phariseeism because it's an exclusive club of priests or fake priests. They were not recruiting anybody, and you can't join their group anyway.
You mean Sadducees?
Sadducees, excuse me, I apologize, yes. Yeah, you can't convert to that group, and they don't want you. Unless you're very, very wealthy and you can show that you come from a priestly family, you ain't joining the Sadducees. So we really have a much more monolithic structure here, and they're saying they have to convert to this. You can be any kind of Pharisee that you want, but you got to be a Pharisee, because that's pretty much all there is. Unless you want to join that exclusive weird group of people out in the desert called the Essenes. Those are pretty much your only two options.
So denominationalism must have been begun with Catholic and Protestantism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to think about that. I mean, the Catholic Church had control of all of Christendom for almost, we're talking about 1,100 years, 1,200 years. The Catholic Church was dominating all of Christianity.
And that's why the Pope became so authoritative.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tremendous abominations happening in that situation. Darren.
Well, the problem with this verse is everybody focuses on verse 20 instead of 21, that they will hear the rest of the Torah.
Yeah. Thank you for... Yeah, absolutely.
Read that and they're like, well, they're going to learn halakha. No, when you sit in the bema seat, you weren't allowed to commentate.
You're jumping ahead of me there, Princess. All right. No, you're good job, buddy.
I see so many commentaries, even at school right now, they teaching me verse 20, but they're skipping verse
Skip it.
21.
Yeah, if it's like verse 21 doesn't exist at all. I understand. Let me get this bus back on the tracks. Now, here's how you can know what's going on here. What time is it? Am I running out of time? I'm doing good. Okay. Sexual immorality. What is sexual immorality?
Many things. It could be lusting. You know, if you see a woman at that time who was very much so clothed, and so if you saw a woman, she looked attractive or whatnot, you kind of lusted in your mind.
Okay.
What did Yeshua say? He said, even if you lust in your mind about something, I'm not just checking your outward stuff.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. You're saying to lust after a woman who is not your wife is sexual immorality.
Yeah.
Now, where did you get that? Did you just come up with that?
I just thought about it. Yeah,
You just pulled that right out of your nose.
I look at like sexual immorality as
I'm messing with you, kids. I'm saying, where did you get that? Did you just come up with that on your own?
no,
No, where did you get it?
the gospel is
Oh, from Yeshua. Okay, where did he get it?
from the Father.
Where was that? Was that written somewhere? Yes, Leviticus. Okay, interesting. So, if I tell is there anything else that's sexually immoral? Is that it? I just can't sleep with someone who's not my wife? There's a list? There's a list. Where is this list? Leviticus 18. Huh?
Are we going to review those?
Well, no. I think, unfortunately, I don't want to review those because they're slightly uncomfortable. But let me tell you this. If I go to all of these Gentiles who, frankly, in the Roman times, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the Roman times, it was bad. Okay, we've got cult prostitutes. This is part of their worship service to their gods. Male and female cult prostitutes. Concubinage. One thing is very, very clear in Roman culture is adultery was treated very seriously. They did have some serious hardcore stuff about adultery. But that's very loosely defined because it's totally cool for me to have multiple concubines. But if I sleep with another man's wife, that's some serious business. If another man sleeps with my wife, that's some serious business. So adultery in that sense is very much frowned upon in Roman society. However, aside from that, anything goes. So when we say to these Gentiles, keep yourselves free from sexual immorality, where are they going to get the definition for sexual immorality? From Roman law? From Greek law? Are we just expecting that they're going to understand what we're talking about? No. You can't define sexual immorality except through God's law, through the Torah. You have to, and you can't just, yes, you can look at Leviticus chapter 17 and 18, 16, 17, and 18, to get the instructions regarding what does it mean, what does sexual immorality mean. That's the only way you're going to find it, is to read it in the Torah. You can't just expect to tell these Gentiles, hey, stay away from sexual immorality, and oh, by the way, go and figure out what that means by yourselves. Use your cultural norms. The Holy Spirit will guide you. You'll feel bad when you do it. Is that what we were going to tell them to do? That's the way the Holy Spirit works, you guys. When you screw up, you'll feel bad. That's how you'll know what's right and wrong. Is that a good way to do it? No. I tell my children that all the time. Look, guys, I can tell you, because I've done drugs, that you can learn through my wisdom, the easy way, or you can experiment and go through it yourselves, the hard way. There are two ways to learn any lesson. You can learn it the easy way or the hard way. When you listen to someone who's done it or who gives you some wisdom from God and says, don't do it, you learn the easy way. You don't have to experience that. But many of us are stupid, and we need to learn the hard way because of learning by baseball bat rather than a gentle whisper is much more effective. So, yeah, my point here is how are you going to even know what pollution by idols is? Where does this defined? Where are you going to know about sexual immorality? Unless it's defined. Where are you going to know about strangled things? Where are you going to know about blood? Interestingly enough, and I know that I've mentioned this to you at least on one other occasion, all four of these things, idolatry, sexual immorality, things strangled, and blood, are all referenced in Deuteronomy 16, 17, and 18. Right there, in the very middle of the Torah, which is the very first things that we teach to Jewish children. This is the beginning, right smack in the middle of the book of Leviticus. It's all right there.
Deuteronomy.
Not Deuteronomy. Oh yeah, it's just some of it's repeated in Deuteronomy, absolutely.
You said Deuteronomy 16.
Oh, I apologize. Leviticus,
16.
speaking sideways. Yes, Leviticus 16, 17, and 18, not Deuteronomy 16, 17, and 18. It's all right there, right in the middle of the Torah. The part that is taught to children. God's children learn that section first. And doesn't it make sense? Isn't it a gracious thing to bring in children of the faith, Gentiles who have no clue what's going on, and say, let's start with the basics. Let's go right to the center of the Torah where we teach our children the difference between what is right and wrong, sexually immoral, idolatrous, and interestingly some food rules, which has to do with ritual impurity, which we've been dealing with repeatedly in this chapter. So it's interesting, isn't it, that these instructions that these Gentiles are getting are directly from the Torah, and you can't even figure out what they mean unless you read the Torah, which is exactly what it says in verse 21. Because Moses is taught in the synagogue every Sabbath day. So we're expecting these Gentiles to do what? Go to a synagogue on the Sabbath day. Now, where else would they go?
Church.
There is no church. There's no church. It will be some time before they start the first house church. The only reason there was a house church in Lydia's house in the book of Acts is because they were in a smaller city that didn't have a synagogue. The point here is, where else are they going to go to learn what these things mean? You have to go to a synagogue. And you have to go on a Sabbath day because it's the only day that the synagogue is open for business. I mean, yeah, it's open all the time, and you'll see people in there studying. You can go anytime you want, but that's when the big spiel is happening. Keith?
Isn't synagogue a Greek word?
It is. Synagoge. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And so there, he says there's Greek cities everywhere that have, a synagogue. Go there and learn the rest of the instructions. For example, note what is taught in a synagogue and what is not. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, because many of you probably haven't been in a synagogue. How many of you have actually been in a synagogue, not a Messianic synagogue, but a regular Jewish synagogue, and been there and been seeing what's happening? Okay. What are they teaching? What are they?
Not Yeshua.
No, they're definitely not teaching Yeshua. They're reading the Torah. They're reading the Torah. You will not... Now, do rabbis always study and teach the Torah? No, not really. They study and teach the Talmud. But in the synagogue? No. When you're hearing teaching in a synagogue, it is always the Torah. Because they're going through that Torah cycle that we reference to you every single time this fellowship starts. We're telling you, here's the Torah portion, because Jews all over the world are reading that same Torah portion. And when the rabbi is up there at the bema seat teaching the congregation about this words of Moses, what is he using to teach you what those words mean and how to apply it to your life? The Talmud, which is a commentary on the Torah. And I've told you that before. If you go and you buy the Walvoord and Zuck, or you buy all of these different English Christian commentaries on the Gospels so that you can understand what the Bible is saying a little clearly, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. There's a lot of tremendous wisdom there. It's the same thing with the Talmud. The Talmud is a commentary on the Torah. Some of it's rather fanciful, but, and some of it's downright weird, but it is a commentary. So they are commenting on the words of Moses every Sabbath day in the synagogue. So that's why we're telling these Gentiles to get to the Sabbath day on the synagogue, because they're going to teach you the rest of the story, as Paul Roberts, what is his name, that old guy on the radio. Here's the rest of the story.
Two things. So, can they're not teaching the whole Torah because there are omissions.
Yeah.
7:14.
Yes.
The prophecies are excluded.
Right. And that is...
So we have to keep that in mind.
Well, and I think that that's a good insight. And I would say, yes, you are correct that the Torah cycle that is taught does not always include the prophets and the writings, but a lot of it does.
Which is part of it, because it's the Old Testament.
But here's what I would say. I am convinced that the removal of certain prophetic passages that are no longer included in the Torah cycle, there's a reason they're no longer included in the Torah cycle, and it's because of a reaction to Christianity. You don't want to go into your synagogue as a rabbi and be teaching the people in the synagogue Isaiah 53. That's going to jar. They're going to go, whoa, what is this? We never heard this before. You can talk to a lot of people who were raised in Judaism. I know. Jews avoid the Isaiah 53, 54, 55 like the plague.
Even though it's the Torah.
Even though it's the Tanakh. Yes, that is correct. Who's got their hand raised? John? Johann Kopp.
So, verse 21 indeed is kind of interesting. So, does that mean then, after that conversion of the Gentiles, that the Gentiles would go then to the synagogues?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought they were not allowed to go to the synagogues if they're not circumcised.
No,
My question is, are they then going to the synagogues to be with the pure Jewish people, so to say, who only learn about Torah?
Yeah.
While on the other hand, for example, Sunday or the rest of the week, learn about the gospel?
Well, that's a good question. And what I would say is, if you'll remember going back to some of the times when Paul first went to these synagogues on his first missionary journey, what you'll hear him say is, brothers and sisters, you converted, who have converted to Judaism, and you God-fearers. So we know that in these synagogues, in these Greek cities, there are three types of people who are let into that synagogue. There are Jews, converts, and God-fearers. So the converts are obviously converted to Judaism. They're pretty much in the same category as the Jews. But you got this third group that's called God-fearers who have not converted to Judaism. Now, what do they make them sit at the back? Are they segregated? I don't know. But they are allowed in there. But it seems, and I think you have to remember when we've talked at the beginning of the book of Acts, that the Jews in the Holy Land, in and around Jerusalem, they've got more stringent, higher standards for themselves. And you definitely would find synagogues in and around the city of Jerusalem that would say, no, we're not letting God-fearers into this place. But some would. But just as in general, the Holy Land Jews were much more stringent about that. But out in the diaspora, out in the Roman world, Paul, whenever he's addressing these people, is identifying those three groups of people in the synagogue. So in relation to, are they going to a synagogue? There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else you can go to hear the Word of God, to get more instruction on what do these things mean, to fellowship with other believers who believe in this God. Now, that's a troubling situation because right now, do you have Messianic synagogues? No, not really. You don't. It's unlikely. Now, some of these places that Paul mentions, that he visits, and a whole bunch of people believe. We hear one story where the president of the synagogue believed and his whole family. Is that synagogue now going to be converted to a Messianic synagogue? Potentially. What we have to remember is what we've said all along is this is a sect of Judaism. This is Judaism. The only difference with this sect of Judaism as opposed to the other sects of Judaism is probably two things. Number one, we now know who the Messiah is. You don't. Our Messiah has taught us to, in a more spiritual way, interpret some of the Torah. Your rabbis are still are a little bit more fleshly and are more concerned with the outward side and are maybe a little over the top. with some of the instructions. Our Messiah said, let's strip away some of this stuff. Let's not impede the commandments of God. So we're dealing with a sect of Judaism here. This is a sect of Judaism.
When you say strip away some stuff, you're talking about rabbinic commandments.
I'm talking about man-made traditions and doctrines that need to be stripped away because Yeshua said you've got a fine way of setting aside the commandments of God in order to prefer your own doctrines. So that would be the only real differences with this sect of Judaism is identification of the Messiah and stripping away the commandments of men to get to the pure Torah and a more spiritual interpretation of the Torah. And that's what I think that we're all about. So are they going to find a Messianic synagogue? Undoubtedly, that might have happened in some places. And I see no reason why, because you've got synagogues all over the place, that, you wouldn't necessarily have a problem seeing Messianic synagogues start to pop up, where the people who believe in Yeshua and begin to walk out their halakha, their way of walking out the commandments in this new and unique way, would begin to form themselves into groups. So they can't just go to any synagogue necessarily. For now, it's just a weird sect of Judaism. Did God intend for there to be two peoples? No.
In Paul's reference to the breaking of bread from house to house, where is that?
Yeah, they were going from house to house and enjoying fellowship at the beginning of the book of Acts in chapter 3, I think it is. Yeah, and that was just fellowshipping on a daily basis. That really doesn't have anything to do with a formal gathering. It's just they're going from house to house and sharing their bread and holding things in common. And that's not a church service necessarily, at least from my own research. That's what I have found. Did someone else have their hand up? Carla, I apologize.
Just to remember that, the various apostles and Paul and other of the believers, they would travel to these different synagogues in different cities and talk about Yeshua and his life. And that was where it started. And these people were Jewish. The ones, the apostles that came to the knowledge of Yeshua as the Messiah. So we just got to remember, this is the start of what we call now the church.
Yeah.
This is where it started.
Right, absolutely. That's a good point. And I would say the only caveat that I would throw into what you're saying is it's not really the start of the church, because the church goes all the way back to in the wilderness with Moses. But this is a refinement and a cleansing.
Identification of Messiah.
Yes, absolutely. So there's no question about that. And I would just say, you have to go to a synagogue to try and figure out what do these things mean. I mean, you can't just deliver this message to the Gentiles and expect them to understand what is strangled stuff. I mean, do you have any idea what is strangled stuff?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
If you strangled it, you didn't bleed it, which is against the commandments.
Okay, so strangled stuff, what is your idea? Trafe. What is trafe?
Anything that's killed by an animal or dies of natural causes.
Okay, that is the dictionary definition of trafe. You will hear that word used in rabbinic or Jewish circles. The word trafe. That is basically a Yiddish word, which is translated from terafah, which is from the Torah, and that literally means torn. And that's what Jimmy was talking about. You can't eat an animal that you walked up on it as like there's a lion that's just killed this gazelle, and you're like, hey, get out of here, I'm taking that. And, you can't eat that. That's unclean. That's roadkill. Yeah, sorry, Jimmy, you're not supposed to eat roadkill, buddy.
Montana went through all this effort to make it legal to eat roadkill. It was illegal for a while because they thought people would poach.
Oh, yeah.
They would
pretend like it was roadkill? Of course, yeah. No, so I totally understand. But yes, strangled, when a Jew says treif, both today and for a long, long time, probably going back to here, although we can't prove it, treif has a whole big connotation. Anything that is unclean or unkosher by Jewish standards is called treif. Pork, shellfish, pepperoni, Anything that is unclean is just lumped into that category of treif. That's what it is talking about, is things that are strangled. And the Christians have been wrapping themselves around the axle trying to figure out, what do we do with this commandment? They've made all kinds of really weird interpretations of this passage. Some are like, oh yeah, well, what they were doing was they like to strangle the animal and leave the blood inside the animal and then cook it like that because it tastes better, or it's some kind of pagan ritual or something. I don't know about that. It's certainly possible, but it's a little unusual, and I have found no reference to that in any pagan ritual that I could find. What's more likely is that we're talking about terafah, strangulation, because that Greek word strangled literally means choking, which is the equivalent to the Hebrew word terafah, which is where we get the word treif, which means anything that's unclean for human consumption. So, is the ruling council of Jerusalem telling the Gentiles to stay away from unclean foods? Yeah. Yes. Because what happens when you go to visit your fellow brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith and you bring some pork chops to their barbecue? You're not going to be welcome. And you're all now these people in this day and age, they'd be like, oh yeah, we don't eat that kind of stuff, But in this day, well, you possibly, but you'll contaminate them. You'll make them ritually unclean. That's a big deal. At this time, they can't go to the temple. They can't make sacrifices. They can't do a lot of stuff if they become ritually defiled.
And if you are, you can't come in contact with others.
Yeah, you can't even come in contact to others because ritual impurity is translated by touch. So, in relation to what's going on here in the book of Acts, it all makes sense because we're talking about Gentiles going into a congregation of Jews in a synagogue, messing everything up. You can't do that. If you come in and you bring some idolatry in with you, you're not going to be welcome here. If you come in and you bring unclean food, you're not going to be welcome here. If you come in and you bring your 2 or 3 wives and your homosexual lover or whatever, you're not going to be welcome here. You can see Paul referencing this in the book of Corinthians. Angela?
That's kind of like walking into the nursery ward at the hospital in March and coughing.
Very much. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Now, blood. Blood is definitely linked with strangled things because of the connection in the Greek terminology there in your New Testament. But does blood necessarily have to do with eating blood? There are places in the world that eat blood today. Blood sausage, blood pudding kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Some people, certain cultures drink blood after they kill an animal or something in some kind of weird ritualistic ceremony. Absolutely. But what else could be included in this blood thing, which I think is part of the instructions that they're giving here? Can blood be ritually defiling? Yeah. Menstrual impurity, blood that has to do with childbirth. There's all kinds of ways that you can become contaminated and ritually unclean with blood. It's not just eating it or drinking it. There's a whole slew of instructions that come along with this blood thing.
What about blood transfusions? Because Jehovah's Witness,
Oh yeah, I that's a great question, and I don't know how to answer that exactly. That any Torah command can be set aside to save life. That's my understanding. Angela, and then Larry.
When I was teaching, every year, within a couple of months of school starting, we had to do blood-borne pathogens workshop because a lot of nasty stuff is transmitted through the blood. And every teacher had to pass this test on what you do if somebody starts, you had to wrap your kid in plastic and send him to the nurse. Well, it's not realistic, but...
No, yeah, I totally understand. Larry?
And the blood being unclean, the Orthodox have 2 different bathrooms.
You bet they do.
For the women that are menstruating.
Sure. Yeah.
Cannot use.
Yeah, absolutely.
The general bathroom.
Right. So this is a serious business here about this ritual impurity, and these instructions are directly from the Torah for the purpose of bringing these people in and not making it uncomfortable and starting them small. Not throwing all of the commandments at them at the same time and having the Pharisees, who are the pure and the righteous ones, come down on these people and say, you got to do this and this and this and this and this and this. It's like, let's start them off small, but these are the important, the biggies that will preclude you from going to the Sabbath day to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. If you violate these, you're not going to be welcome there.
Does it fall into the same thing when the Torah says if you spill blood, you have to bury it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So, is the remainder of the Torah abrogated by these 4 rules? Obviously not. We cannot, under any circumstances, say the instructions here from the council is that if these Gentiles, if you'll just do these 4 things, that's all you have to do. That's impossible, because that just kicks the 10 Commandments out of the whole equation. And I don't think you're going to find any Christian anywhere who's willing to kick the 10 Commandments to the curb, with the exception of the 4th one. But that doesn't make any sense at all. Nobody's talking about kicking the 10 Commandments to the curb. So no, you can't just say these are the 4 things that you have to do and that's it. That doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. Now, the common understanding that people love to do is break the Torah into, well, we've got moral commandments in the Torah and we have ceremonial commandments in the Torah. That's a huge thing. What's the problem with that?
Nowhere in Scripture says that.
It doesn't say that anywhere in Scripture. And that also leaves you with the distinct idea that God made up a bunch of rules that were just there for show. That were just there as something to do. That were just there for part of some ritualistic purpose. What's that, Angela?
Hoops to jump.
Some additional hoop to jump through.
It's for fun.
That's the way that most Christian commentators will tell you that, well, the moral instructions of the Torah are still in play, but all of the ceremonial instructions have been done away with. Yeah, where does it say that? It doesn't say that anywhere. The Torah itself never identifies anything as moral versus ceremonial. The New Testament never clearly delineates, oh, well, there's this kind of commandments and that kind of commandments. What you're saying is God made up a bunch of rules just for the sake of doing it, to have some hoops to jump through. That's not ever true, Angela.
Well, just earlier you were talking about idols, and health was one of those, right?
Yeah.
So don't you think somewhere in that Torah, he would have given you some instructions to address that issue, knowing how important it is
Yeah.
to you?
Yes. Absolutely.
And
That's a serious issue. That's not something that's just a ritual. Absolutely. Keith?
The ceremonial, that's focusing a lot more on the feast days and all that. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what a lot of people lump it into, thinking ceremonial law is, oh, that's the sacrifices and that's the feast days and such like that.
anything that they cannot identify as a right or wrong.
Yeah, anything that you can't identify as, oh, this is good behavior and bad behavior must be thrown out. That is so wrong. So very, very wrong. If you understand what is the purpose of these ceremonial laws, you'll see that it is way, way deeper and more meaningful than just a hoop to jump through or some type of external ritual religious thing that really doesn't have that much significance. Never, ever, ever would God give a series of instructions that really didn't serve much of a terribly important purpose.
Well, it also is kind of laughingly, because then it shows when he says he shows no partiality. Apparently, God loves Christians more than he loved old Israel, because he made them go through all this hell and killed them and exiled them, all stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And he can just, abrogate it and walk in.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And one of the funniest things I saw was a meme somewhere that said God gave his Torah to the Jews and Israelites, and then he sent Jesus to set the Gentiles free from it. How does that make any sense? I thought that was kind of funny. He gave his Torah to his family of Israel and then sent Jesus to set the Gentiles free from the Torah. Very strange.
So come on Sunday and we'll talk about it.
That's right. I'm going to just say this. If you tell your children, and you probably have, hey, stay in school and get good grades and you'll be off on you'll do all right. Is that a good piece of advice?
Make good choice.
Just stay in school. Well, yeah, for many of us who are homeschooling our kids, that would not be good advice. But in general, from back in the day, you would say to, hey, stay in school and get good grades and you'll be doing well. That is good advice. Is that the entirety of your advice for your children? No, it is not. And did your children interpret it that way when you said, hey, stay in school and get good grades and you'll be doing all right? Did that mean in their minds, oh, well, I guess I don't have to brush my teeth anymore? And no. We need to think of this in the same way. The disciples were being gracious to these children in the faith, saying, if you'll do these things, you'll be off to a good start. And you can grow from there because you're going to go to where everyone else in the world who worships this God is learning and growing together. It was never intended to separate the family of God into two people. God does not like, what is an abomination to God? Someone who causes dissension among brothers. It's a bad thing. I apologize for taking up so much of your time. Let us pray in fellowship.